You know that feeling when someone looks right through you like you're invisible? Well, let me tell you about the day I learned exactly what that feels like, and more importantly, what happens when invisible people suddenly become very, very visible. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 months ago I was just another face in the crowd, shopping for a reliable used car on a Tuesday afternoon. By the end of that same day, I'd accidentally started a revolution that would shake our entire city's establishment to its core. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the Mercedes dealership on Fifth Avenue, where my husband Michael had suggested I look for something practical. "Get whatever makes you happy," he'd said that morning, kissing my forehead before disappearing into his home office for another day of mysterious phone calls and video conferences. After 15 years of marriage, I'd stopped asking too many questions about his work. All I knew was that he traveled constantly, spoke multiple languages fluently, and somehow we never seemed to worry about money. I assumed he was some kind of international consultant. Shows you how much attention I was paying to the details that actually mattered. The dealership gleamed like a jewelry store, all marble floors and spotless glass, with cars positioned like precious gems under designer lighting. I'd dressed simply that morning, jeans and a comfortable sweater, my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just wanted reliable transportation. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was walking through those doors without a man beside me. The sales floor buzzed with activity, well-dressed customers examining luxury vehicles, while impeccably groomed salespeople hovered nearby like attentive hawks. I wandered between the cars, running my fingers along smooth paint jobs, peering through windows at leather interiors that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. A modest sedan caught my eye, silver with clean lines and a reasonable price tag. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. Perfect. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, waiting. Salespeople walked past me repeatedly, their gazes sliding over me like I was part of the furniture. They rushed to greet every other customer who entered, men in business suits and women dripping with jewelry, but somehow I remained completely invisible. Finally, a young salesman approached, his smile as artificial as the air freshener hanging from a nearby car's rearview mirror. "Can I help you find something?" His tone suggested he was doing me a tremendous favor by acknowledging my existence. "I'm interested in this sedan," I said, gesturing toward the silver car. "Could you tell me more about its features?" He glanced at the vehicle, then back at me, his expression shifting subtly. "That's a premium model," he said carefully. "The starting price is $42,000, plus taxes and fees, of course." The way he emphasized the price, like he was testing whether I'd flee immediately, told me everything I needed to know about his assumptions. "That sounds reasonable," I replied calmly. "Could I take a test drive?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, we'd need to run a credit check first, and see some proof of income. You understand, it's dealership policy." I understood perfectly. This was the part where he hoped I'd realize I was out of my league and quietly disappear. Behind him, I watched another salesperson hand keys to a teenager whose father was nodding approvingly. No credit check requested there. "Of course," I said. "What documentation do you need?" 20 minutes later, I sat in the finance office while a stern woman with helmet hair scrutinized my paperwork through reading glasses that she wore like a weapon. My credit score was excellent. My bank statements showed healthy balances, but something in her expression suggested she was looking for reasons to say no rather than yes. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said finally, "your income appears to be modest. And you've listed your occupation as freelance writer. That's quite unstable. She made freelance writer sound like professional gambler or amateur criminal. I'd published articles in national magazines, maintained steady clients for years, but apparently that didn't qualify as real employment in her world. My husband has significant income as well, I offered. Perhaps we could include his information. Is he here to co-sign? She asked, glancing around theatrically. Because I don't see him. The young salesman shifted uncomfortably in the corner. Even he seemed to recognize that something wasn't quite right about this process. He's working today, I explained. But I can call him if you need to speak with him directly. She waved dismissively. We prefer to handle financing with the actual buyer present. Perhaps you could come back when your husband is available to discuss this purchase properly? The dismissal was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its efficiency. Almost. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. This wasn't about credit scores or bank balances or proper procedures. This was about a woman in jeans and a ponytail daring to waste their valuable time. I see, I said quietly. And if I wanted to pay cash? The finance manager's smile became even more condescending. Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but $42,000 in cash is a significant sum. We'd need to verify the source of those funds, ensure everything is legitimate. Money laundering regulations, you understand. Money laundering. She actually said money laundering. Like I was some kind of criminal mastermind running a sophisticated operation out of my suburban kitchen. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse and paperwork with deliberate calm. Thank you for your time, I said. I think I understand your position perfectly. Mrs. Mitchell, the finance manager called as I reached the door. Please don't take this personally. We're simply following standard procedures to protect both the dealership and our customers. Standard procedures. Right. I wondered how many other women had heard those exact words in this same office. The main showroom seemed even brighter as I walked through it, the luxury cars gleaming like accusations. I was almost to the exit when the general manager intercepted me. A tall man with silver hair and a smile that probably cost more than the car I'd been trying to buy. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it? I heard there was some confusion about financing. His tone was perfectly calibrated, concerned but patronizing, like a parent explaining to a child why they couldn't have dessert before dinner. No confusion at all, I replied. Everything was quite clear. I hope you understand that we have certain standards to maintain here. Our clientele expects a particular level of discretion. We can't simply approve financing for anyone who walks through our doors. There it was, the truth, delivered with a smile and wrapped in corporate speak, but unmistakable in its message. I wasn't their kind of customer. My clothes weren't expensive enough. My jewelry wasn't flashy enough. My husband wasn't standing beside me to validate my existence. I understand completely, I said. Thank you for making your position so clear. I walked out into the afternoon sunshine feeling like I'd been slapped, my cheeks burning with embarrassment and something much stronger. Anger. Pure, clean anger that started in my chest and spread through my entire body like electricity. 15 years of marriage, and I'd never once felt the urge to call Michael at work. I'd respected his privacy, trusted his judgment, supported his mysterious career without question. But as I sat in my old Honda in that dealership parking lot, something fundamental shifted inside me. I pulled out my phone and dialed his private number, the one he'd told me was for emergencies only. He answered on the first ring. Sarah? What's wrong? Even through the phone, his voice carried an authority I'd never really noticed before. a commanding presence that seemed to fill space even across digital connections. "Michael," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "I need you to come to Mercedes of Fifth Avenue. Right now. Are you hurt? Are you safe?" The concern was immediate and intense, protective in a way that made me realize I'd been taking his devotion for granted. "I'm fine," I assured him. "But I think it's time you met some people I've just had the pleasure of encountering." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Michael spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the gentle, concerned husband. In his place was someone I'd never heard before, someone whose words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "Don't go back inside. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. In Tuesday afternoon traffic, it should have taken at least 45 minutes to reach downtown from our suburban home. But I'd learned to stop questioning the impossible things about Michael's life. Instead, I sat in my car and watched the dealership through the windshield, observing the rhythm of a business that had just taught me exactly where I stood in their hierarchy of human worth. 18 minutes later, I heard it before I saw it. A deep, powerful rumble that made every other sound on the busy street fade into background noise. Conversation stopped. Pedestrians turned to stare. Even the valet attendants at the hotel across the street abandoned their posts to get a better look. The Rolls-Royce Phantom that glided into the dealership parking lot was not just a car. It was a statement written in handcrafted steel and leather, a declaration of power so absolute that it didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed, and everything else rearranged itself in response. The vehicle stopped directly in front of the dealership entrance, positioned with mathematical precision in a space that hadn't been designated for parking. It didn't matter. Rules like parking spaces apparently didn't apply to cars that cost more than most people's houses. The driver's door opened, and my husband stepped out. Except this wasn't the Michael I'd kissed goodbye that morning. This man moved with fluid confidence, his posture radiating authority even in casual clothes. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times that suddenly seemed different, more deliberate. Then he turned toward my Honda and smiled, and for just a moment he was my Michael again, warm and familiar and absolutely devoted to making sure I was okay. He walked over to my car, opened my door, and offered his hand like I was stepping out of a carriage at a royal ball. "Hello, beautiful," he said, his voice soft and private and meant only for me. "Ready to go shopping?" I took his hand, and together we walked toward the dealership entrance. I could feel eyes on us from every direction, could sense the shift in atmosphere as people tried to process what they were seeing. The same valet who'd barely acknowledged my existence earlier now practically sprinted to open the door for us. "Good afternoon, sir, madam." His deference was so complete it bordered on comical. Inside, the showroom had gone quiet. Every salesperson on the floor had suddenly become very interested in whatever we were doing. The young man who'd reluctantly helped me earlier appeared at our side immediately, his attitude transformed completely. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, welcome back. I'm so sorry about the earlier confusion. How can I assist you today?" Michael's smile was pleasant and utterly terrifying. "Confusion?" he asked mildly. "What kind of confusion?" The salesman's face went 3 shades paler. "Oh, just some minor paperwork issues. Nothing serious. I'm sure we can resolve everything quickly." "Paperwork issues," Michael repeated thoughtfully. "How interesting. My wife mentioned something about credit checks and money laundering concerns. That does sound serious. The general manager appeared as if summoned by telepathy, his earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Mr. Mitchell, what a pleasure. I'm David Richardson, general manager. I understand there may have been some miscommunication earlier. Michael's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes had gone very cold. Miscommunication. That's one way to describe it. He turned to me. Sarah, would you like to show Mr. Richardson the car you were interested in? We walked over to the silver sedan, our little procession growing as staff members found excuses to hover nearby. I pointed to the vehicle I'd been examining earlier, the one that had apparently been too expensive and too risky for someone like me to consider purchasing. This one, I said simply. Richardson nodded eagerly. Excellent choice. A beautiful vehicle. Top-of-the-line safety features, luxury appointments, German engineering at its finest. The same car, Michael observed. That your finance department determined my wife couldn't afford? The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable for everyone except Michael, who seemed perfectly content to wait for an answer. Richardson cleared his throat. I think there may have been some confusion about the approval process. Perhaps we could start fresh? Start fresh, Michael said. Yes, let's do that. But first, I'm curious about your standard procedures. Do you always require credit checks for cash purchases? Richardson's smile was becoming increasingly strained. Well, no, not typically for cash transactions. And do you usually discuss money laundering with customers who've provided legitimate bank statements and excellent credit scores? That seems unusually aggressive, Richardson admitted. And when a customer expresses interest in a vehicle and provides all requested documentation, is it standard practice to suggest they return with their spouse for proper discussion? Richardson was now visibly sweating despite the air conditioning. Mr. Mitchell, I assure you that we treat all our customers with the utmost respect. Michael nodded thoughtfully. The utmost respect. I see. He walked slowly around the silver sedan, running his hand along its surface exactly as I had done earlier. Beautiful car. My wife has excellent taste. He paused at the driver's side door. What's your best price on this vehicle? Richardson's relief was palpable. Finally, a question he could answer safely. For you, sir, I'm sure we can work out a very competitive package. Perhaps we could sit down and discuss numbers? Actually, Michael said, I think my wife should handle the negotiations. After all, it's her car. The suggestion landed like a physical blow. Richardson's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a sickly gray. Of course. Absolutely. Mrs. Mitchell, what did you have in mind? I looked at the man who'd dismissed me so thoroughly an hour earlier, who'd questioned my credibility and suggested I wasn't worth their time. Now he was hanging on my every word, desperate to salvage a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his control. Well, I said slowly, I was thinking about the financing terms your colleague mentioned earlier, the ones that were so problematic. Michael leaned against the car, watching the show with obvious amusement. Yes, I'm very curious about those terms as well. Richardson was trapped, and he knew it. Every word he'd said earlier, every assumption he'd made, every dismissive gesture was now being held up for examination. I'm sure we can arrange much more favorable terms, Richardson said weakly. I have some authority to adjust our standard policies for valued customers. Valued customers, I repeated. That's interesting. What exactly makes someone a valued customer in your establishment, Mr. Richardson? It was a trap, and we all knew it. Any answer he gave would either contradict his earlier treatment of me or expose the ugly truth about how his business actually operated. The silence stretched until even the background hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Richardson's discomfort was radiating outward, affecting everyone in the immediate vicinity like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Michael straightened up from his casual position against the car, and somehow that simple movement commanded everyone's complete attention. "Mr. Richardson," he said conversationally, "I think we may have gotten off track. Let me clarify something for you." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim leather wallet, the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about its owner's status. From it, he extracted a simple business card and handed it to the general manager. I watched Richardson's face as he read the card. His expression went through a fascinating transformation, confusion giving way to recognition, recognition to shock, and shock to something approaching terror. The card trembled slightly in his hands. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. I mean, we had no record of—" "No record," Michael agreed pleasantly. "I prefer privacy in my personal affairs. My wife and I live quietly. We don't feel the need to announce ourselves everywhere we go." He paused, letting that sink in. "But apparently your staff has some difficulty recognizing valued customers unless they come with appropriate accessories." Richardson looked around desperately, as if hoping someone else could handle this situation for him. The finance manager who'd been so dismissive earlier had appeared at the edge of our little group, her face pale as she realized exactly who she'd been lecturing about money laundering and proper procedures. "Sir," Richardson stammered, "I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding. This is entirely unacceptable, and I take full responsibility." "Misunderstanding," Michael repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what we're calling it?" He looked around the showroom, taking in the faces of staff and customers who were trying to look busy while obviously listening to every word. "You know what I find interesting, Mr. Richardson? How quickly attitudes can change once people have additional information." The young salesman who'd first approached me was hovering nearby, probably wondering if his job was about to disappear. Michael noticed him and smiled. "You were professional," he told the young man directly. "Even when your colleagues weren't." The praise seemed to physically steady the salesman, who nodded gratefully. "Now," Michael continued, turning back to Richardson, "about that car my wife was interested in." "Absolutely. Whatever Mrs. Mitchell would like. Full financing available, or cash, whatever is most convenient. No documentation required beyond the basics." Richardson was babbling now, throwing out offers like life preservers. "And the price?" I asked sweetly. "For valued customers, I'm sure you have some flexibility." Richardson's laugh sounded slightly hysterical. "Of course. Significant discount available. 20% off asking price. Maybe 25%. It was fascinating, watching him negotiate against himself in his panic to fix this situation. "That's very generous," I said. "But you know what? I've changed my mind about this particular model." Richardson's face went completely white. "Something else? Perhaps something more luxurious?" I walked slowly through the showroom, aware that everyone was tracking my movement. I stopped in front of a pristine white convertible, the most expensive car on the floor. "This one," I said simply. Richardson nodded eagerly, probably calculating commissions and hoping this nightmare might actually end profitably. "Excellent choice. Absolutely beautiful vehicle. Michael joined me beside the convertible, running his hand along its sleek lines. What do you think, sweetheart? Is this the one? I think, I said carefully, that I'd like to consider my options. After all, there are several other dealerships in the city, places that might be more welcoming to customers who don't arrive with the right accessories. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. In an industry where reputation and word of mouth could make or break a business, the implication was terrifying. Richardson was practically vibrating with anxiety. Mrs. Mitchell, please. I'd like to make this right. Whatever it takes. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd allowed his staff to treat me like an inconvenience, who'd stood by while assumptions about my worth were made based on my clothing and the absence of a male guardian. Mr. Richardson, I said finally, I think the real question is whether you can make things right for the next woman who walks through these doors alone, and the one after that. The words hung in the air like a challenge. This wasn't just about one sale anymore, or even about my personal experience. This was about systematic attitudes that had been exposed and found wanting. Michael was watching me with obvious pride, and I realized that this moment was as much a test as it was a resolution. I want to propose something, I continued. I'll buy the car, at full price, but I want you to implement a new policy. A real policy, not just words on paper. Richardson nodded eagerly. Anything. What would you suggest? Every customer who walks through these doors gets the same treatment. Same financing options, same test drive policies, same level of respect. No exceptions based on appearance, gender, or whether they arrive with a chaperone. Absolutely, Richardson agreed. I'll have new training protocols implemented immediately. And, I added, I want monthly reports on customer satisfaction, broken down by demographic categories. Not because I don't trust you, but because systems work better when someone's paying attention. Richardson looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at Michael's expression convinced him that negotiation wasn't really an option. Of course, monthly reports, full transparency. I walked back to the white convertible, running my fingers along its pristine surface. Then I think we have a deal. The paperwork took less than 30 minutes. The same finance manager who'd questioned my legitimacy earlier now processed everything with supernatural efficiency. Her previous concerns about proper procedures mysteriously resolved. As we signed the final documents, Richardson appeared with a bottle of champagne. For our VIP customer files, he explained, as if this level of service was perfectly normal rather than a desperate attempt at damage control. That's not necessary, Michael said quietly, but with enough authority that Richardson immediately tucked the champagne away. We prefer privacy, remember? As we prepared to leave, Michael paused at the entrance and looked back at the showroom. Staff members were still watching nervously, probably wondering what stories might be told about this encounter. Mr. Richardson, Michael said conversationally, I hope you understand that reputation is everything in business. People talk. They share experiences. In today's world, those conversations can reach a very wide audience very quickly. The threat was delivered with perfect politeness, but Richardson's nod was vigorous. Absolutely, sir. Complete understanding. Exceptional service for every customer. I drove my new convertible out of that parking lot with the top down and the sun on my face, Michael following behind in the Rolls-Royce. In my rearview mirror, I could see Richardson standing in the dealership doorway, watching us leave like a man who'd just survived a natural disaster. 3 months later, I still smile every time I drive past that dealership. Not because of revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't satisfying. I smile because change is possible, even when it seems like systems are too entrenched to move. The monthly reports arrive like clockwork, showing steady improvements in customer satisfaction across all demographics. More importantly, I've heard from other women who've had positive experiences there, who've been treated with respect regardless of their appearance or marital status. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to accept that invisible is their proper place in the world. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply insist on being seen. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who love you turn out to have more interesting stories than you ever imagined. Michael still works from his home office, still takes mysterious calls and video conferences. But now I pay attention to the details that matter. Now I ask questions. And when he smiles at me over dinner and asks about my day, I have much more interesting stories to tell him in return. After all, visibility is a choice. And once you decide to be seen, the world looks completely different from behind the wheel of your own life.